Unfortunately, the PAC and the more radical leftists had no chance to be able to say that the transition in 1994 was going to look like us getting back our land, because the struggle was against land dispossession. The struggle was not for us only to vote. It was not us for us to integrate with white people, because the original sin is the question of land dispossession, and that has not been restored.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Certain Amount of Madness. I am your host, Mamka Anyona, and I am joined in studio by my dear comrade, Phethani Mazibandhila, who's calling in from Germany, but he's a South African, and we are talking about the situation that is unfolding in South Africa this week. The news has been rife for weeks now, months even, with news of growing anti-immigrant sentiment in South Africa. And on the 30th of June, there was a march to an anti-immigrant march, an anti-illegal immigration march, as it was framed. And this has sparked a lot of conversation across the continent. I'm sure our viewers and listeners also paid attention to the World Cup and the sentiments that Africans had against the South African team at the World Cup. And it has really brought to the fore the simmering question of intra-African negative sentiment, whether you consider it, a kind of tribalism, a kind of racism, a kind of xenophobia. This has been a conversation that I've been looking forward to having with Phethani for a while. So welcome, Phethani.
Thank you, Mamka, for the warm welcome, and indeed greetings from Germany. And of course, except the World Cup, this whole month, we have been watching with serious keen interest of the situation happening in South Africa, and especially for us South Africans also, of course, and what was going to happen on the 30th of June. So I'm happy to be here to share my thoughts and be able to engage in the conversation. Thank you.
Great. So Phethani, let us start from just the situation on the ground at the moment. I assume this is 2 days later, so things have calmed down. Were there any lives lost? Was there any property destroyed? How many Africans, do we have the numbers of how many other non-South African Africans left the country? What's the situation on the ground right now?
Okay, so the situation on the ground right now is that there still continue to be a number of sporadic marches which are happening in across the country. I mean, as you might have heard, the declaration made by the leader of March and March, Jacinta, on Tuesday, on the 30th, is that they're going to be marching every Thursday until their demands are met. So today, in some other parts of the country, there's some marches, but even though I've not seen the full report of where it is, but looking at the aftermath of Tuesday and the many number of people who have been repatriated so far, I believe that they are Malawian nationals, were mostly repatriated from the coastal province of KwaZulu-Natal, and then towards the northern part of the country, which is in Limpopo, where I'm from, towards the Beitbridge border. That is where they're being processed, and then eventually passing through Zimbabwe, and then ending up in Malawi. And also those who are from West Africa, most of them have been flown out through our international airport in OR Tambo. And Zimbabweans also have been repatriated also, but the highest number so far that I've seen, and the reports that we've seen, is people who are coming from Malawi. But also, you've asked a very important question in terms of destruction of properties and death, and of course, there's been destruction of properties that we saw in across different parts of the big cities, especially in Johannesburg. And what pretty much happened during the day is that, I mean, some of us who have been part of protests for a very long time, we know how we organize protests. So during the day, it's much more chilled, because you are afraid of them being cited by police and everything else. But in the evening, that's where things start to get difficult. So we saw there was a number of lootings which happened across different parts of the country. In Alexandra, one of the biggest townships in the country, just opposite the richest square mile in the continent in Sandton. And then there was also some of the lootings which happened in KwaZulu-Natal and other parts of the country. And also in terms of some lives lost, what has been confirmed so far, that there was a life which was lost in Alexandra, in the township that I spoke about. But there was an incident of shooting which happened in Hillbrow in Johannesburg, one of the hotspots in which migrants are found, where there was shooting of protesters by one of the migrant community people. And what we have gotten so far today is that some of the people have been arrested. So the state is on top of that. But also importantly, just before the 30th of June, on the 29th in Cape Town, I believe in Langa, if not Nyanga, there was a Ghanaian man who was shot and killed. It's very important to say Cape Town. Why I'm specifically saying Cape Town in one of the townships in Cape Town, because in Cape Town, although the Ministry of Ghana has released a statement and saying that the person was killed, it was due to xenophobic attacks. But what really happens mostly in Cape Town is that there's been what is known as extortion gangs. So the extortion gangs, they go and demand monthly payments from foreign-owned spaza shops or businesses, whatever. And then if you don't pay, then you get killed. So it is part of that. But so there's very important, there's an importance of being able to differentiate between these two kind of activities, because the extortion gangs have been existing for a very long time in Cape Town also, which is one of the areas which is very much surrounded by gangsterism. So it was, as currently reported by the South African Police Service, the man who was killed, it was related to an extortion activity rather than a xenophobic activity. So that is what we have so far from the ground.
Okay, so truly an unfortunate turn of events. So I want us to talk about why this is happening. But we know, as the Marxists that we are, we know this is multi-layered. But I want to take at face value the argument that is being made by March, by Operation Dudula, and others, that there's a feeling that migrants, especially economic migrants from other parts of the continent, are taking South African jobs, are taking, are opening businesses and sort of crowding out South African, capital in the small and medium enterprise space. There's a sense that they are, involved in crime, and they're driving a lot of the crime in South Africa. And I know that there is good data on this. So let's just take it at face value. Is it actually true that this is the case? Can we actually demonstrate using data that a lot of the jobs that are being taken by non-South African Africans would actually have otherwise gone to South Africans, and that they are driving some sort of crime wave in the country?
I think that statement is very important to consider, that we don't want migrants because they are taking our jobs. Okay, it's a very simplistic statement. It's very simple, right? But I think it's much more important to be able to go beyond the literal meaning of what is being said. In fact, in the morning that I had forgotten to respond to this is a post by one of the South African professors. His name is Professor Friedman. He was quoting some research which was saying that there is no actual tangible evidence to that migrants are taking jobs of which will otherwise have went to South Africans. But my response to that is a bit different, and also offers a bit more of more serious and crude analysis of what really is happening on the ground. But the truth is that South Africa is a country which was built by a very serious wave of migrant labor. And if you guys were going to do some edits, please add Yuma Sikela's song Stimela. You must edit as part of the edits. It's very important because it explains the trajectory of migration of Africans all the way across the hinterlands of Southern Africa, being brought into South Africa to work in mines and other different places which were owned by, of course, white capitalists in South Africa. So the question of that are migrants taking jobs is that it's not that migrants are taking jobs in the literal sense. They are, there is, of course, the mechanism that works here is that, as I said, that South Africa was built by migrant labor. And when I say migrant labor, it's cheap migrant labor that has always been used in South Africa. So in actually, because I speak a lot actually, so in 1921, there was a protest which was done by white workers in South Africa. It's called is known as the Rand Revolt. So in this Rand Revolt, march is happening just almost 10 years after the 1913 Land Act. My good comrade Sungu has also told me about the Kenya Land Act, but I just forgot its full title. In which land was taken by white people, and then when most of the land was taken, it turned the African people into proletariats, right? So this strike which happened in 1921 by white workers who were saying that white workers must unite for the white South Africa. They were saying since now capital has been bringing in cheap labor in the form of black people to work in the mines, they are undercutting their jobs and salaries and everything of that nature, right? So when we look at the analysis of what it means when the working class, I mean, the working class, most of them, I mean, they don't have time to read Das Capital and everything of that nature, but they are just speaking crudely of their experiences. But it requires us to be able to take the question beyond and analyze what it means. So what actually it means is that, yes, the migrants are being brought into the country to be able to undercut the jobs that otherwise South Africans will have rejected, or the jobs that are below the minimum wage. Because remember, in 2018, we signed our minimum wage bill was enacted. So in order for capital to be able to circumvent the legal requirements of them hiring workers, and also these workers being able to be earning salaries beyond the minimum wage, they hire people who are migrants, who have less protection in the law, and most of them are brought in the country through smuggling networks or human trafficking networks. So the question is that, are there jobs which are being taken? That is a very moralistic kind of view or observation. But when you do a material analysis of what it actually means, it actually means that the migration that is happening, for the labor migration that happens to South Africa, it is being used by white capital in South Africa, and also a certain level of black capital that is emerging. It is used to be able to divide the working class together in terms of nationality and what passport do you hold. And those who are from outside of the country, because of they have less protection, are actually not accorded them the right standards. Because I remember when I was working in Cape Town in the trade unions, when I was organizing the trade unions, it was difficult to be able to organize migrant workers to be able for them to join the trade unions, because they were already made to be fearful by their bosses that if they join the trade unions, I'm going to make sure that you get deported. So the literal meaning, of course, it makes it kind of very moralistic. But if you go beyond the surface and analyze what really the statement means, it actually means that capital is using workers to be able to divide them according to their nationalities, and therefore, when they bring in undocumented laborers, they are able to exploit and use them in a way that benefits their interest and make more profit.
Yeah. So so that is a really astute sort of like response to what comes off as a very simple statement that I really wish mainstream media was questioning a bit more, because when you look at the coverage across the world of this situation, the statement is just repeated without proper analysis, and it seems to make sense on the surface. Yes, of course, if you have poor migrants from other parts of the continent, they're going to come and take jobs. But it is correct that it is a way of labor's exploitation. It's a means of labor's exploitation across the world, actually, to always create an underclass of workers who have incentivized to remain underground, because then they are cheaper. They're easier to exploit. They cannot be covered by, they cannot organize as easily as those who are covered by some sort of constitutional protection. But I'm very curious to know, at least from your perspective, who's driving the organizing behind this? Because there is, even in Kenya, for example, as I mentioned to you just before we began, I had hoped to have this session alongside a Kenyan who can also speak to the growing xenophobia in Kenya. There's a very strong growing anti-Somali, anti-other African immigrants, Burundians, and others. There's a growing anti-immigrant sentiment in Kenya. It just hasn't organized itself yet in the way that the South African one has. So who is organizing this, and who is benefiting from firing up these sentiments every so often?
Yeah, I mean, remember, it's been bubbling up for a very long time in South Africa. I mean, in 2008, we had the West xenophobic uprisings in which 62 people were actually killed. And there's an image of his Mozambican man who was being burnt alive, which you can find it on the internet after. It's there on the internet, you find it. And 21 of those 61 people who were killed were actually South Africans who were mistaken to be foreigners due to their looks, probably to their accents, and also, of course, that has also showed face again in 2015. In 2015, it happened again, and then you also had another uprising, xenophobic uprising in 2019. And in between, there's always those kind of sentiments that have always brewed up. So earlier on, I said that the people who are being taken towards the side of the northern part of the country was Limpopo, where I'm from. So it's very important to mention that, because it's like in Kisumu. Kisumu is close to Uganda. So if there was an economic downturn in Uganda, people start migrating to Kisumu, obviously. So where I'm from in Venda, the first wave of migration of Zimbabwean people actually happened in communities where I grew up. So when I grew up a lot with Zimbabwean people. In fact, even towards this week, I was speaking to my Zimbabwean friends who live in my community, and then we were making jokes about it, like, "Hey, you!" They say you must go, and they're like, "No, me, I'm not going anywhere. I've been living here my whole life," and stuff like that. So, in our communities where I'm from in Venda, because it's rural areas and more of a peasantry community, when the wave of migration started to happen in the early 2000s, people came into our communities. We lived with them, and we actually bonded together, and we have built community together in the difficult conditions that they've been. And in fact, many of them will encourage them to say, "You have worked this whole year, please go home, and then you'll come back in January, and then you go and see your family. If your parents are still alive and everything, then they will go home, and then they will come back." We didn't have a problem with that. I mean, but as time went on, as I think post 2008, and looking at the global economic downturn of the 2008 global meltdown in 2008 in the USA, of course, the kind of social dynamics that social relations that are prevalent in the cities are not the same ones as the ones in the villages where I'm from. So even though there's not been direct xenophobia in where I'm from, there's been kind of uneasiness with foreigners from Zimbabwe and other places, because not only Zimbabweans are there, but also some few Mozambicans live in our community where I'm from. But up and above, they've always remained very safe. Even this week, I was speaking to my mother last week, and some other friends in the community said, no, there's nothing going on here. Everything is fine. We're good. But when you go to your cities in Johannesburg and everything of that nature, you start seeing this kind of growing sentiments happening because of the contest around jobs, the contest around economic activities, people being able to survive. Because remember, when migrants come into the country, but also it's very important that there's also people who are documented, because in 2008, if not 2009, the South African government issued a special permit for Zimbabweans to have what is called as a ZEP. So if you have a passport, then you're able to get your ZEP permit and to be able to live and work in South Africa as a Zimbabwean. So that has eased kind of the levels of deportation that we used to see when we were growing up. But if you have a ZEP, then you're okay. But as people, of course, there's no need for people to stay in the villages. Then they'll go to the city. I mean, people are always leaving my village to go to the city. Even myself, I'm here in Germany. I'm not in my village because of economic opportunities and educational opportunities. But when you go to the city, that's when the problems begins. Now people are contesting over material interest, legal jobs that are there, and the economy of South Africa also having going through a downward spiral. So those are the realities which are there. The realities of that the economy is not growing enough to be able to accommodate people, and the high levels of deindustrialization that we have seen in South Africa since post 1994. But then let's go to the part in which who's organizing and who's stoking this violence. So these are the realities which are there across South Africa and across, I believe, in the continent and in other countries which is suffering under capitalist hegemony, where there's lack of jobs and also less economic opportunities. But then you have your March and March leaders, but I mean, March and March is a very organization. There was Operation Dudula before. Operation Dudula started around 2018, 2019 in Soweto, led by a fellow called Tata Lux. They were also making the same demands. All foreigners must go. But of course, they are in their public statements, they say illegal migrants, I mean, undocumented migrants. That is a better word to use politically. Undocumented migrants. That's what they say. But it does not matter if you are a migrant or not. If you have a Kenyan accent or non-South African accent, you have to go, even if you're documented, right? So that is what they say. But in reality, in the ground, that is not what happens. So those who are mobilizing are people who are using these genuine and real concerns that are on the ground for political expediency, and also importantly, there's I don't like saying this, but because I will sound like Chawambeki now, but I believe that there is a third force motive. That's what our former president always says, that the third force motive, and what we have seen so far in this week, that there's also a question around the idea that the funding that probably is coming out of the fact that South Africa took Israel to the ICJ, and we know how Mossad functions, and to find low-hanging fruits like xenophobia and fund some organizations, although it is not proven, because it is not good to cast aspersions to organizations like March and March and everything. It is not proven yet, but the suspicions of that nature, that these organizations or these people are being funded from countries like Israel to be able to bring in some instability into South Africa, and also collapse the moral canon that South Africa took when they took Israel to the ICJ. But also to substantiate that, there's been this week, strangely, because remember, social media has become an avenue of mobilizing. It is no longer a thing that we can ignore anymore. So the president reshuffled a cabinet the cabinet 2 days ago, if not yesterday, and one of the new members of the executive is a Muslim man from the Democratic Alliance, the second biggest party in terms of votes in the country. And what we have seen, what we have observed in the last 24 hours on Twitter is that there's um, about this rise of Islam. The Islamists want to take over South Africa and everything of that nature, and that language tells you who's funding. Obviously, it directs you to the idea that there's Mossad and Israel involved in some of the. In South Africa, we've never had that kind of language in which there's Islamophobia, but this week I've been witnessing it. It's online since also one of these ministers was appointed that the Muslims want to take over South Africa and everything of that nature. So there is G9 concerns of a crumbling and a dwindling economy, which is not sufficient to cover everyone in terms of jobs. But then there is elements in society who are using these G9 concerns in the community to gather them for political expediency and being able to achieve some agendas that they want to achieve. So that is, as we learn from history, that is always how fascism has always mobilized and began in different countries, especially like here in Germany, where I am right now.
Yeah. And I want to also bring up something that is also alleged, that when I was doing my research about this, the Daily Maverick wrote about the genesis of the South African Constitutional Review Group, the SACR. And it seems that the leaders behind that also seem to have an interest in reviewing the constitution for other purposes and are sort of bundling, at least it is alleged that they are bundling this on top of the anti-immigration, sentiment to be able to pass other laws, such as, controlling of the NGOs. That seemed to come up as well. Do you know about that? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I know about that. I know the lady behind it. I just forgot her first name, but her name I think is in Ntombeni. She does a lot of work around energy, the question of nuclear energy and stuff like that. But I saw that article that you're referring from the Daily Maverick, although I don't remember exactly the chronology and everything else that they wrote about. But yes, there's been a push against anti-NGOism. But of course, I mean, my good comrades in Kenya, they wrote that book about the NGOs. What is the title again?
The silences in the discourse around NGOs, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yeah. I was supposed to put a chapter there in that book, but that's a talk for another time. So, but I think there is G9. I mean, in everything else in life, it is always governed by dialectics, right? So, as I was saying earlier, then that there's G9 concerns about the economy, which is not able to provide jobs and economic activity for everyone in the country. And there's also a G9 concern about the motives and the funding of NGOs across in the continent, and definitely as we have seen, I mean, the lobbying of the anti-LGBTI+Q bill in Uganda, which was funded by mostly Christian fundamentalist organizations from the USA, and the critiques that Prof. Shivji provides in his seminal work, Silences in NGO Discourses, which was actually my Twitter name for a very long time. So maybe I would have been confused for being one of the anti-NGOs. But there's valid critique, and also there is right-wing critique of NGOs. So there's critique which is valid, but there's critique which comes from the right wing. And the critique which comes from the right wing is that the NGOs are the reason why there is hijacked buildings in the CBD of Johannesburg, which actually attacks one of the organizations that my comrades organized in. It's called SERI, it's a Socio-Economic Rights Institute in South Africa, which deals a lot around socio-economic rights of marginalized people. They organize with an organization called Abahlali Basemjondolo. I'm sure you probably might have heard of it. So they've been attacking the organization. That the organization is essentially responsible for bringing migrants into the country, when such organizations have done stellar and amazing jobs in defending the poor and the marginalized people in the country. But also, then you have this anti-NGO sentiment that the NGOs are actually responsible for the large waves of migrants in the country. When they say no, that you don't want migrants to leave, when they are being evicted, you're the first ones in line to be able to defend them. But it is there in the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees everyone in the country, regardless of their legal status, basic human decency. It guarantees them basic health care, right? So I always say to this propagandist, okay, it's fine. You disagree with that. Migrants who are in the country are supposed to have basic healthcare and basic services in the country. You either contest elections, win, and change the constitution, or you do a coup. You change the constitution, and then you remove all these things in the constitution. Because backing from the outside and running in the streets and on Twitter pushing propaganda, it's not going to help you. So you only have those two choices. And right now, we have a constitutional framework, however limited and flawed as it is, but it is there. Then if you want it to be changed, you go and contest it. So these anti-NGO sentiments have targeted many civil society organizations that have been doing great and amazing work. I mean, who can forget about the treatment action campaign, which mobilized against for the provision of ARVs when the pandemic was rippling effects across South Africa. So in today's time, you find that when there is economic downturn, there's either going to emerge a left which is critical and able to take the masses to the next stage, or a fascist movement is going to emerge. And in South Africa, what we have seen is that a fascist movement is emerging. So in that article that Daily Maverick writes, I think they kind of make it a trace of how these sentiments have grown, mostly on Twitter and also on other social platforms like TikTok. And then you had people embracing the language of Trump, like put South Africa first, make South Africa great again. And then I'm sitting here wondering when South Africa have been great, because the forming of the polity, which is known as South Africa in 1910, was a consensus between the British and the Dutch people after they fought in the Anglo-Boer War to be able to make a country called South Africa. And they made that country, or they decided to have that country without the consultation of the native South African people, the African people, right? They didn't consult us. They just formed a country called South Africa without consulting us. And then all that time has been brutality against Black people until 1994. And even post 1994, although we were guaranteed some civil liberties, but there's never been economic justice. There's never been land justice for Black people. So then I want to question, when has South Africa been great for Black people? So making it great in what sense? Define what do you mean by that? So the rise of those sentiments and the attacks against the NGO movements, and also one of our coalition which was formed in 2019 called Kopanong Africa against xenophobia, which means unite against xenophobia, is some of the attacks that we have seen coming from the xenophobes. I mean, it's very important to emphasize that there is xenophobia in South Africa, right? It's very important. It's very important to clarify that. But also at the same time, there is genuine concerns about unemployment, the issue about unregulated migration, and as you have seen, as you have seen of late, the people who are being repatriated mostly from Malawi and also Ghana. Many of them were undocumented, and then they were coming from workplaces in which they were working. So, in fact, yesterday, our national broadcaster reported that there was a refugee camp which was set up. Let me call it a refugee camp of that nature, which was set up for people who were to be repatriated to go back home. It was closed 3 or 4 days ago. Yesterday, employers came and dropped off their workers who are undocumented. They just dropped them off and then disappeared. So then there's that question of people bringing people into the country without proper documentation. What I referred to earlier on the question about the question of jobs and what is really happening.
Yeah. So that is a really interesting sort of distinction that really needs to be made, that there is economic pressure at the, for the majority of South Africans, especially for Black South Africans, and that economic pressure and that limited access to resources, to jobs, the unemployment rate stands at an arguable 60%. Is the basis for a really, genuine sort of discontent. But there are a lot of other factors and actors, known and alleged, who are riding on this wave to their own ends. And it is unfortunate that it is taking on a fascistic turn rather than taking on a sort of like a collectivist, progressive organizing turn. But let's talk about where the real exploitation is happening, as it were. So, as I was doing my research, I know that these figures are sort of like contested, but it is understood that they're less than 8% of South Africans are white. So 7 point something percent of South Africans are white. And they own, of individually owned agricultural land, they own 72% of that. 72% is down from about 85% in 1993. So the assumption is that there was a bit of redistribution, but it still remains, agricultural land remains very much still in white hands. Whereas, is it 81 or 82% of the country being Black and owning only 4% of agricultural land? Land being one of the most important inputs into capitalist production. That tells us a little bit about the wealth distribution, the racial wealth distribution in the country that seems to not have been addressed by the end of apartheid. So let's talk, because for leftists, whenever we see the working people, the working poor struggling at the margins of society, we always understand that they are fighting against, they're punching down the real enemy, the real the real exploitation is usually happening elsewhere. In places that are more removed. And worldwide, there's been this growing sort of inequality in wealth. And that obviously would have to affect South Africa as well. I would imagine that also contributes to this feeling of, and not even feeling, but this real experience of constraint at the lower levels of society. So tell me a little bit about this sort of racial difference and how the post-apartheid South Africa has dealt with it, and whether you feel, in your experience, it has been dealt with, sufficiently, and whether redistribution is happening in a way that actually can address some of these issues in a more permanent way.
Yeah, that's a very important conversation, Mamka. I think it forces us to really look onto where we are. And I think, as I said earlier on, the social media has become also a site of contestation and political discourse, especially for the youth of Africa. We have the highest population of people across the world who are under the age of 25. So we really have a lot of serious youth population. So in South Africa, as you were saying, you were referring to the unemployment stats. So the 62% of unemployment is for the youth. So, but overall, generally, it's around almost 40% now unemployment, the overall. But you cannot have such a large youth population which is unemployed. Yeah. So then, way back to your question about the end of apartheid and the land question and where we are today. So there's very important things which happened towards the end of apartheid in South Africa. And the very first important thing was the collapse of the USSR in 1989, and the Eastern European socialist bloc that collapsed and ushered in a new dawn of liberal democracy, as Fukuyama writes, the end of history.
Yeah.
And giving a triumph that no, there's no other alternative except liberal democracy.
Yeah.
So if you were asking me this 11 years ago, when I was younger, I was actually going to be a very regional radical and say, no, it's the ANC, they have not done enough, and 1, 2, and 3. Yes, the ANC has not done enough, but in a time in which they were negotiating the transition towards democracy in South Africa, they were dealing with several contending global forces that wanted to shape the world and how the world must look like. And we also see this at the time of the golden age of capitalism and the question about development, about what the West was saying about how do we develop the former colonies. And then you had I think Rostov writing a non-communist manifesto of development, and then which ushered in the era of course of neoliberalism, as we saw it in Chile with the overthrow of President Allende. And then so when South Africa came, now we're coming in with a complete defeat of the global left forces at the level of state power, with the USSR being dismantled, Yugoslavia being dismantled, and everything else that resembled or that resisted capitalism being dismantled. So of course, South Africa, as the hotbed of capitalist exploitation in Africa and in the continent, it was not spared the rod of neoliberal democracy and how democracy must look like when it was coming into 1994. So in fact, there's even a clip. I think I'm speaking too much about Thabo Mbeki today. So Thabo Mbeki speaks about the transition that we're having in the early 1990s, in which Zimbabwe was actually, there was already a growing sentiment of that the land must be given back, because remember, Zimbabwe gets its independence in 1979, if not 1980, and then there's the infamous Lancaster Agreement. What do you call your agreement in Kenya? You also had your own form of agreement.
Yes, I cannot recall the name right now.
Yes, but you also had your form of agreement, which Kenyatta was leading. So in Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe one was called the Lancaster Agreement. So ours was eventually called...
Ours was the Lancaster Agreement as well. Actually, it was just the Lancaster Agreement.
Oh, Lancaster.
Yeah, it was just Lancaster as well.
That should be in Lancaster, because if we did not gain pseudo-independence in 1961 to be a republic, we would have went to Lancaster. But let me focus back on the question.
Yeah.
So now, we're coming into this early 90s question with contending global forces about what South Africa must look like in this future. And Zimbabwe had already signed the Lancaster Agreement in 1979, and they have not been given back their land as promised by Britain. So in the early 90s, they were already threatening to go and occupy the land. And then there was sentiments that no, you should wait. Let's wait and see what South Africa becomes, and then we can be able to push our agenda, which eventually came in 2000, in 1999, in 2000, when Zimbabwe took back all their land. But in our case now, you have the sunset clause and the negotiated settlement. So this negotiated settlement comes out of those contending global forces and global sentiments about how the world must look like in the triumph of neoliberal democracy. So the compromise around the question of the land was done, and then property remained in the hands of white people. And as the preamble of our constitution says, that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And then you go back to the Freedom Charter, which was signed in 1955. And then when you look at 1955, you wonder, who did the land belong to in 1955? I mean, in my family, in my personal family, in my family, my great grandparents were actually dispossessed out of their land in 1959, after the signing of the Freedom Charter in 1955. So obviously, there was really no black person at the time who was saying that the land, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, because the land was in the hands of white people. So how can you say that? So that it eventually became a policy, a political, a compromise which was adopted in the early 90s, in which land was left in the hands of white people. And the political party which I learned everything I'm saying now, where I learned from in the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the PAC, the more radical political party of the time, which led the march in Sharpeville, which led into the massacre, and eventually the armed struggle in South Africa. They had a different view of how the transition was supposed to look like. But as I said earlier, that if you had met me 11 years earlier, I was going to be very radical. But as I learned about more politics and the global dynamics, unfortunately the PAC and the more radical leftists had no chance to be able to say that the transition in 1994 was going to look like us getting back our land, because the struggle was against land dispossession. The struggle was not for us only to vote. It was not us for us to integrate with white people, because the original sin is the question of land dispossession, and that has not been restored. So in today's time, as you were quoting the stats, of course, white people still remain less than 8% of the majority, but they still control the largest swath of land in the country. And in social media and in on different sides of social media, this is always used as a gotcha point by other Africans. Like, but you people, why are you not fighting white people? Why are you not fighting white people? Why are you fighting against other Africans and your black brothers? But you must understand that white supremacy is a global power. So as I was saying, that in the early 90s, as we came in, we already had to contend with these forces. So now, time went on, and then the question of land became very hot, a very contested question in South Africa. So the PAC kind of fizzles out and dies post 1994 because of its own internal contradictions, and also some of the sabotage from the that happened from white apartheid government. But then you have the EFF, which was born in not 19. The EFF was founded in 2013. So in 2013, the EFF is born. And of course, everyone in the continent loves Julius Malema. They know Julius Malema and the EFF. And they bring back the question of the politics of the land question into the political discourse of South Africa. So between 2013 up until 2019, I will say that in each almost, if I could go in 3 or 5 posts on my Facebook, every other activist or leftist that I knew, or even the right wingers, the white right wingers, they were speaking about the question of the land. And in between that time, a discourse, not a discourse, a propaganda starts to happen by AfriForum. So AfriForum is a so-called civil society organization, which is actually a right-wing African organization, which intends to defend the interests of the land thieves. So they start saying that there is white genocide in South Africa. These people are literally 8%. They are less than 8% of the population, and we are over 90. So if there was a white genocide, we could have killed them easily. If there was really white genocide, they could have been killed already. Because right now we're in the state, we have more guns than them. I mean, we have guns, so we could have killed them. But the truth is that there's no white genocide in South Africa. So the reason why they were saying that there's white genocide in South Africa, they're saying there's white genocide. They are being killed because their land is being taken. They are being killed because their land is being taken. So I'm wondering if when they came to South Africa, in the Cape, when they landed on the Cape on the 6th of April, 1652, I wonder if they came with pockets of land that they came with. The land is not theirs. The land belongs to the African people. They stole it through violence, through genocide of the African people. So we've been gaslit for a very long time. So now, then they manufacture this propaganda. They do a lot of this propaganda for a very long time, and then it eventually lands into the ears of Trump. So Trump becomes the president of the USA. I think 2019 that was his first term. Then it becomes 2016 somewhere there. 2019 he lost. So in that time they go to Trump, and then they start looking for alliance in Trump. Trump, we're being killed. They are taking our land. There's white genocide. So then Trump comes back into office in the last year or so. Then when he comes back into office, the first thing that he says that he starts harassing South Africa, saying, I'm going back on the question of the land, of white genocide. White people are being killed in South Africa. The Afrikaners, or the Dutch as they really are, and they are offering them asylum in America because they're being killed, right? And there's the question of genocide. So the accusations of that there has not been focus on the question of land. I mean, to restore back the land and fight for the wealth of the African people, that has been done. But in post-19 and South Africa, any other forms that has been done through constitutional means, through organizations which are fighting to reclaim back the land, that has been overcome by the global structures of of white supremacy that have reigned, that now have. I mean, if South Africa was to pass a decree right now and take back the land like Zimbabwe, we're going to be sanctioned like Zimbabwe if we take back the land. So this is a warning. That the warning has been put that if you dare touch the interests of white people and take back the land, we're going to do what we did to Zimbabwe to you. But also importantly, part of this question there's also the weakness and the political unwillingness of the ANC to be able to also resolve this question. Because in the second term, because Mandela was there in 1994 to 1999, when Thabo Mbeki was voted in 1999, the ANC had two-third majority, so they could just go to parliament and amend the constitution and say that we're taking back the land completely, right? They didn't do it, but because of their own compromises and their own internal political weaknesses, that has become really what the organization has become. So the critique is that yes, the land is still with white people. The land is still with white people because they have protection from global white supremacy and the West.
Indeed.
And also, there's also been serious weaknesses and unwillingness from the ANC to be able to resolve this question, especially from the black bourgeoisie of the ANC. And then it goes back to the what I was saying, that in the early 90s, what shaped what became of South Africa and how it became. So apartheid was defeated politically, but its economic foundation has not been defeated, which is the land, which is still in the hands of white people.
Yeah, indeed. The economic foundation of apartheid still continues. Now, something, a little bit more controversial I found as I was doing this research is that last month, we're now in July. So in May, there was an article that was a white paper, and I forget the name of the publisher of the white paper, but it followed a Republican summit of some kind, where the Republican Party of the United States, at least a group of them, were in a meeting where they were honoring the Afrikaners who were apparently genocided by the Zulu during, I forget the full story, during a revolt of some kind at the founding of the South African Republic. And so this was sort of like, the title of the paper was In Support of the Volksstaat. Alongside that, there was an article, a blog on the Times of Israel, actually a series of blogs on the Times of Israel that said South Africa must fragment, South Africa must be divided. And the thrust of the argument is that South Africa, like many African countries, was not an organically formed sort of national entity. It is an entity with multiple ethnicities, religions, races, and whatnot that have been brought together through the colonial project. Correct? And the argument is that for Africa to develop, these countries must be divided into more sort of manageable chunks that should be divided along ethnic lines. And the argument being made by an Israeli obviously invokes Israel as a success of ethnically fragmented ethnostates, and invokes the stability as I assume the author thinks of it as such, of such a state in the context surrounded by states made up of different ethnicities. So the argument in those articles and in the support of the Volksstaat and all of that is that there seems to me to be a general, sentiment. I don't know whether it is growing or it is just a fringe sentiment, from the powers that be, that South Africa would do better as a divided country. And I know that internally there are separatist movements. There's the separatist movement of the Zulu, there's the Orania and Cape Independence, and a variety of other separatist movements. So there seems to be this sort of like, as xenophobia plays out, there's this. It seems to me, and maybe you can enlighten myself and my audience. What is the state of this separatist movement? How powerful are they? Who is driving this? Who would benefit from a divided South Africa? And is it even constitutionally possible? And is it is it something that, we should be watching out for, that South Africa may be divided in time? And then we can come back to how that affects the whole Pan-African project. But let's just talk about the international and the sort of external forces onto these separatist movements.
Yes, yeah. You have referred to a very important conversation which is bubbling under and kindly, very overlooked, right? And a wise Pan-Africanist once said, by the name of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, that the struggle that we're fighting is the struggle to fight against the balkanization of our land, right? And then he cited examples of Shaka bringing in small ethnic groups to make a bigger ethnic nation group. He spoke about Musheshwe and other African warriors who built ethnicities and groups, right? But also importantly, the project of apartheid. Remember, apartheid means separate development. In the crude sense, it means separate development. That's what they wanted to do, so that they would offer us false independence or pseudo states, and say that you are an independent state. So, in fact, when I was born in the year 1993, I was not born in South Africa. I was born in Venda, because Venda was a republic at the time.
Okay.
So, if Venda still existed, I would be having a Republic of Venda ID document, right?
Yeah.
That is what they succeeded in doing. So then you had other Bantu stands like homelands, like you had Ciskei, Transkei, Wuputatswana, Livuwa, Gazankulu, all across South Africa, and then that was divided along ethnic groups. But the struggle that we had to fight and push back against was that we are against this balkanization. We're against this division of African people in order to be able to form small non-viable states which are not going to be able to resist on the face of imperialism. And as I'm speaking about this, I'm thinking about the OAU meeting of 1963, but I will speak about that at the end. So now, as you have said there, yes, the Israeli Times paper I think they said Africa must fragment and South Africa must be first. So the agenda is to balkanize Africa, as we see with Somalia and Somaliland. The other day I was laughing with my friend that I saw that in Somaliland there were people who were deported, and I'm like, who will recognize Somaliland in Africa? I mean, really, but Israel also recognizes Somaliland.
It does, yeah.
Israel recognizes Somaliland, and I believe that they also recognize the occupation of Western Sahara by Morocco. But there is a Cape Independence movement, which is ironically led by a British citizen with South African citizenship right now, and our state has not acted. That man should be deported. He must go back to Britain, because he's leading this Cape Independence movement, which says that the Cape must be balkanized and then becomes its own independent country and all that bullshit. But the truth is that the truth is that there's always been a stoking of that kind of those kind of sentiments around the balkanization and the weakening of African states. And also, you mentioned the issue of Zulu nationalism and the commemoration which was done. So I believe that what you might be referring to should be the Battle of Isandlwana, in which Nkosi Cetshwayo managed to score a victory against the Boers in the 1800s, and also the Anglo-Boer War probably in the late 1900s. I mean, in late 1800s towards 1900. But there's always been a weaponization. So there is. I speak in a lot of dialectic terms. So there is nothing wrong with in your case in East Africa with the Luos. I mean, the Luos are spread across different countries in East Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, and also I believe some other parts of South Sudan. There's Luo people. So there was nothing wrong with building a nation of people to be able to build a nation at the time and to defend themselves against settler colonialism. As I mentioned earlier on about the how King Shaka built the Zulu nation in the early 1800s, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but at the same time, there's been a weaponization and use and co-option of the strong sense of the Zulu identity and Zulu nationalism, which was actually used against the idea of building a united South Africa in the early 90s. Because in the early 90s, you had the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party, led by the late Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Some called him Gacha. Then the IFP actually was saying that they want independence, but they want to have their own country, which is called KwaZulu, which is in the KwaZulu-Natal province, which actually almost led into a civil war in early 90s. It did not been it being averted by Mandela and other diplomatic interventions by our former president, actually, Jacob Zuma, ironically so. So, but in today's time, there's in history, there's been a progressive role which was played by the Zulu nation to fight against colonialism, and I will be amiss not to remember Inkosi Mbabataka Kamanzima, who fought against the hard tax in 1906, which was probably the last resistance that was done by African kings before we eventually formed political parties, in which we were also resoundingly defeated in the Battle of Nkandla in 1906. But post that, there's been a weaponization of the use of those identities that were also used to fragment and also legitimize the so-called Bantu stance. So, like in the part where I'm from in Venda, because when I grew up, we don't have a lot of white people where I'm from because they are mostly inside of the country. Because when they tried to settle in the northern part of Venda, they were defeated 3 times by the king in the time called King Makado. But eventually, in 1899, 1898, we were defeated, and a new king came along, and then eventually they were seduced and given some privileges by Apartheid South Africa, and they agreed that Venda is an independent state by itself. And when the PAC, when the ANC, when the Black Consciousness movement of Steve Biko and everyone else was mobilizing, they mobilized across ethnic lines, and they were mobilizing against these kind of divisions. But now, these divisions today are being reignited to be able to stoke divisions and fragment South Africa and back again into what it was as the separate development and Bantu stance. And also I think the place which was more volatile to be able to be ignited and have this kind of political sentiments is in KwaZulu-Natal, where we have seen also a language of that they actually want to have their own independent state in some quarters that is bubbling under. But also you spoke about the small village called Orania. This one is very much important to address because it's always being cited also online that no, you guys, why are you not fighting against Orania and everything of that nature? But Orania is not as big as it is said. It's a very small village or something of that nature with 3,000 to 4,000 people who are living there in the African community. And of course, I think I will say that it is a pilot project of what a newly fragmented South Africa might want to look like. And these sentiments, if they gain popular attraction, you will have the question of keep independence being a possibility, KwaZulu becoming its own country, some Venda nationalists where I'm from rising up saying that let's have Venda again, let's make Venda again. And there's been some of those sentiments, actually, I've seen them from some people that want our own Venda again. I think we're better when we're Venda as a state alone in that sense, which is actually utter-nonsense, because you're not going to be able to fight against imperialism as a small little state as you are. So, but the last part where you asked about is it constitutionally possible? The good thing right now is that white people do not have enough numbers to be able to have a dominating majority in parliament. I mean, even with all these challenges and limitations, I don't think the ANC will vote for such for such an utter and stupid motion in which South Africa must be able to fragment. But what they can win it is through a political struggle, and this struggle of politics can be won through the stoking of these fires in different places across the country, and also funding some right-wing nationalist, narrow nationalist movements in Venda, in KwaZulu, in former Botswana, in former Kasankulu, and then you will lead into a social unrest in the country, where eventually you will say that maybe the civil war starts, and then eventually people will say that to end the civil war, let's fragment. But in terms of the parliamentary processes, with all its backwardness and unfairness, the ANC, they will not be they cannot vote for that. But if there is social unrest and a civil war can be able to start, so what we need to do that, how do we avert that kind of reality, in which a civil war starts on the basis that we must be able to fragment, that can be able to be a success. But in terms of the constitutional pathway, it is not possible.
It is not possible. So, I mean, it is deeply unfortunate because a lot of what we're seeing happening in South Africa, what you're talking about, having all these economic migrants coming in, what is technically, human trafficking, where people with just absolutely no opportunities across the continent are just shipped to work for meager wages in South Africa. It's only happening because the countries from which they come are also suffering from the boot of imperialism that is completely decimating our countries. The entire Africa has almost no productive base. We have no industrial base. We are literally a producer of raw materials, and the kind of plunder that is happening across the continent of our minerals, of our agricultural lands, and so on, it's unfathomable. And it succeeds because the dream that built independence nations of our forefathers in Nkrumah, Nyerere, and others, of a united Africa that can actually carry its weight on the global stage, a united Africa that becomes much, much harder to bully. That feels farther and farther away when you think about the fact that there are separatist movements seeking to divide even the sort of like very fragile peace, the fragile, maybe not, let's not call it peace, but the fragile stability that the continent has that was agreed upon, when the OAU agreed that we are going to actually, maintain the colonial borders just for the sake of, a stability that we can then, upon which we can build productive bases, we can build productive economies that can, feed our people and eventually, allow us to organize for full liberation. It feels like that is farther and farther and farther away, especially when you listen to this talk about secessionism. But I don't want us to end on a negative note, because there has to be hope. There has got to be hope. Things are bleak. The economic situation on the continent is bleak. The economic situation in South Africa is bleak. These xenophobic attacks, the weaponization of legitimate sentiments by actors who have no interests of the South African people or of the African people generally at heart. We really are vulnerable. And the left is barely existent. I mean, I can say it doesn't exist because that is how I met you, through the Pan-African left on the continent. But say something about the organizing that is happening in the country against xenophobia, against fragmentation and separatism, towards Pan-Africanism, and how do you feel, what message would you have for our viewers and our listeners in terms of, what resources should they be seeking out, what knowledge should they be seeking out, in what ways should they be engaging to support South Africa at this time? So that's a multi-part question.
Yeah, no, it's very loaded, but as you were concluding, I just thought of our good comrade Aluba from the Gambia. I always tell him that he out of all our comrades in the Pan-African left in the continent, currently, I should say that he has a better chance of acquiring state power on our behalf compared to everyone else, because there are few, they're not many. So he just needs 4 or 5 years of mobilizing, and then he can be able to acquire state power on our behalf. That is the almost thing that he can do. So I think what I'm trying to say is that all our desires and political ambitions can be acquired at the behest of state power. And just before, of course, I think I was in Kenya in 2024 in August, spent the whole month there, and these are some of the conversations that I was having with comrades. And comrades, okay, the elections are going to come in 2027, so we have protested in June 2024. We almost tasted defeats. Ruto was able to withdraw his bill, and then but they snag it back in Parliament, and many of our comrades were killed. So what is the way forward? How do we reimagine ourselves building? And I was of the view that comrades must contest state power, and I'm glad that my comrade Sungu Oyo is contesting with the president of Kenya, and comrade Wanjira is also contesting an MCA position, and many other comrades. I'm sure they will put their names up so that they can be able to contest. So I think for us it is very important, and it's also very clear in our minds that we have. I mean, most of us, we came through student organizations, we came through civil society organizations, we came through radical social movements. But every time we went to the streets, as we went in Kenya, as we went to South Africa in 2015 through the Fees Must Fall, and after that, and then the NSARS in Nigeria, we gained momentum, but we were resoundingly defeated a few months later by the states, right? Because the state has the monopoly of violence. And then when we do a post-mortem analysis of where we are, we start realizing that actually, for us to be able to build a Pan-African future that we want, we need to we need to fight and occupy state power. And our ancestors that inspire us, your Nkurumas, your Nyereres, and everyone else, they were not fighting to put pressure on governance. We are putting pressure and wanting to hold the government accountable. They were fighting to grab state power. Yes. So if we are really inspired by the people who came before us, the real power and solutions lies at us contesting state power. So that's why I'm always telling Alibra that we want state power in Gambia. So if we have state power in Gambia, at least then we can be able to say that actually this is we can use Gambia as a template for us to be able to inspire us for a better future in Africa. But in my first time when I actually came to Nairobi, and I spent a week or so, I think it was around the commemoration in February, the commemoration of the death of Pio Kamapinto. I observed and I said that these comrades are ready for a revolution. And in my observation, I was speaking to myself, and these comrades are organized, they are ready for a revolution. And we have seen with the Ruto Must Go campaign in the streets, and 2024, 2025, and eventually we got defeated. But our defeats must not make us lick our wounds forever, but it must make us think beyond what we need to do. And I'm very happy that comrades are organizing towards the elections next year to be able to attain and win state power. So in countries in which, like as in South Africa and also in Kenya, where there's still a bit of legitimacy in terms of contesting elections, that's what that is the strategy that we must use in order for us to be able to organize and build a better country. But in countries like Uganda, I mean, what can you do in Uganda? I mean, of course, everyone knew that Museveni was going to win again. It was just a dress rehearsal in terms of them having elections. So there's countries in which there is no possibility of gaining and acquiring state power through the ballots. But there's countries in which we can be able to do that, as I mentioned, South Africa, Kenya, and probably in Gambia, So then once we are able to win in those small countries, when we have liberated zones, then we can be able to put pressure and also help support our comrades in the countries which is very difficult to organize, to be able to also build a Pan-African future in which everyone in the continent does not have to take boats across the Mediterranean. I mean, young African kids are dying in the Mediterranean, taking boats to Europe, seek for better futures, and where African migrants don't have to be harassed and beaten up in the streets of Johannesburg and Cape Town and Pretoria by xenophobic and right-wing sentiments, because most of the people that are in the country are smuggled into the country. They are smuggled in for because of economic opportunities, because our countries are dysfunctional and the economic there is no economic activity at all. So people are always going to seek greener pastures. But I think the responsibility that the Pan-African left has in the continent, which actually Pan-Africanism has become a very slur word. So I'm expecting a torrent of abuses and insults once this episode is out in South Africa from those who oppose Pan-Africanism. That in actual fact, someone was asking me 2 days ago that so with all these xenophobic uprisings in South Africa and everything that's happening, do you still firmly believe in Pan-Africanism, or Pan-Africanism has no place in Africa? And I'm like, actually, this has solidified my belief in Pan-Africanism more than ever. Because unfortunately, South Africa is not like Mauritius or Seychelles. So we're not in an island in Africa. We are in the continent, in the landmass of Africa. No matter how big a wall you're going to build, no matter how much border control you're going to have, you're not going to stop hungry people from crossing the border to come to a place where there's opportunities. You're not going to be able to stop people escaping wars in your Goma and escaping wars in Sudan to come and seek a better life in a place where it's better. So then the future of Africa, the future of South Africa, the future of Cameroon, the future of the Equatorial Guinea and the DRC and the Chad Republic, it lies in true Pan-Africanism. And we're not uniting because we look like each other, or we like each other's foods, anything like that. But I really like the fish in Kisumu. I'll come back. The first time when I was in Kisumu, I said that I will not leave until I finish all the fish in the lake. But the truth is that our Pan-Africanism must be based in true political unity, and that political unity is that we are all suffering under American imperialism. We are all subjects of neocolonialism. And what is really happening in South Africa right now is that we're at the turn in which all post-colonial African states took, that we are going to be an ordinary African country in which everyone else, I mean, it's because we were last to get liberation 32 years ago. So our turn is coming in which we become a failed state. We are in that trajectory. We're not yet. But how do we arrest that? How do we stop that? And that will require for us to stop shouting from the outside and contesting state political power to be able to arrest that. And then when we do that, we need to be able to organize not just only locally but across the continent in which true Pan-Africanism can be realized. And that Pan-Africanism is political liberation and serious political economy. And also, just as a parting shot, and very importantly, that the xenophobia which is happening in South Africa, that has been also we need to move away from a very moralistic view of what is happening in South Africa. So it is not, for me, it's not a moral shame, a moral failure. Actually, I'm not embarrassed about the xenophobia which is happening in South Africa. Because when I meet people, when they ask me, where are you from? I said, I'm from South Africa. They're like, oh, that. I'm like, come, let's speak. So now, the truth is that Africa, since independence, since 69 in Ghana with Busia, the expulsion of other West African natives, Ghana must go in Nigeria, in Ivory Coast, and the civil war which happened was also around the sentiments of migrants. Then you had Tanzania and Burundi, and then you also had Equatorial Guinea, Chad Republic. Also, there's been the history of xenophobia in the continent. And when you scratch beyond the surface, what you see is that It is the challenges of political economy. It is the challenges of an economy which is not working, because people are saying that you migrants are taking our jobs, you are bringing crimes and whatever, because people are suffering. So the shame which I feel it as an African, not as a South African. I feel the shame of xenophobia as an African, because this has always happened. This has always happened for almost 100 years, and we have not.
And it is happening in Kenya as well. Indeed, it is absolutely. It's happening in Kenya as well, and I plan to have that episode, so my viewers should be waiting for that. So thank you so much, Phethani. We have come to the end of the episode. I hate that we don't have more time. But yes, Phethani, thank you so much for our viewers and listeners. Phethani is a writer, he's a historian, he's currently pursuing, I believe, his master's degree in Germany. And you can find him online, on Twitter, and elsewhere. And I want to leave us with paraphrasing of Mahmoud Mamdani's words when he was in Kenya for the book tour Slow Poison, where he said that migration is the history of humanity. There is no history of humanity where there was no migration. The idea that there will be some future world in which there is no migration is impossible to think about. So beyond just the questions, the political, economic, and moral questions we have talked about, I think it is really important for our viewers to keep in mind, wherever you're listening to us from, whether it is in Nairobi or Johannesburg, that there is no world in which there is no migration. That is simply the nature of human history. Thank you so much, Phethani, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Mamka, and for this opportunity to share my thoughts and ideas. But my parting shot will be that for Africa to be liberated, truly liberated, our only path towards that is through radical Pan-Africanism. And I believe that we'll be able to win, as we have won in the past. We'll be able to win in the future with serious political economy and a radical future for Africa. Thank you.